Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show tonight. Next guest, we have Oscar James, historian out of Bayview, Hunters Point. We want to bring him on to the show and allow him to talk about some history of the Bayview, Hunters Point, the past and the present. We want to talk about the changes over the years from the people being moved out of the Bayview, Hunters Point, from the youngsters growing up the way they're growing up. So we want to bring in Oscar James, historian out of Bayview, Hunters Point. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, it's a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. I want people to know that you're my oldest living brother. First of all, they might ask the James on the screen, so we want to make sure that they understand that you're my oldest living brother.
Oldest living brother.
Yeah. So we want to bring you on the show. We want to talk about the past and the present of the Bayview Hunters Point, the reconstruction of the Bayview Hunters Point, the moving out of the people that's in the Bayview Hunters Point, and so let's talk about that.
Okay. First of all, I'm a native resident of Bayview Hunters Point. I've been there 70 years. I've seen a lot of things, both pro and con, favorable and unfavorable. I've seen the plight of our fathers and our mothers and grandmothers, what they had to suffer through living in Bayview Hunters Point, all of the poverty, all of the success, all of the sweat and tears in buying property out in our communities in the 50s. I've seen a lot of people don't know the history of Hunters Point. When we stayed on Hall Street, you first lived on Navy Road. Then we were fortunate enough to buy a home on 1415 Hall Street. Our grandmother was the first one of African descent to buy a home in Bayview Hunters Point. Mm-hmm. She bought the home in the 30s, 1371 Paloux, where she resided, paid for and owned that property, willed it over to my mother, and taught us as young men, being that we were a family of 6 brothers, mother and a father, who mother and father raised us from the cradle to be adults and until their passing. They were together all that time. A lot of people say black folks have broken homes and what have you. We were one of the fortunate ones. We had a mother and a father, mm-hmm. Good teaching, good ground so far as spiritual, educational wise. We were really blessed. All of my brothers, it was instilled in us to have ownership of property. We all are homeowners, whether we live in San Francisco. I have a brother live in Fairfield. I have a brother lives in Santa Cruz. All own their own homes. And those of us who still stay in Bayview Hunters Point, myself, I'll never leave Bayview Hunters Point. That's where I was raised and I was born. And I try and fight and show and tell the peoples in our community what we went through so far as 1955, 54 when Eisenhower became president, and a lot of the black peoples were forced out of Bayview Hunters Point, moved to the Western Addition. A lot of people moved to Palo Alto, Stockton, Fairfield, Antioch. Well, at that time, Antioch was Ku Klux Klan territory. They didn't allow black peoples to live in Antioch. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our property, such as South Basin, South Park, Butchertown, Betrayal Hill, Dog Patch, all those areas, all the projects that used to be on Army Street, running up to Betrayal Hill to Mariposa. They were all projects all up there, but when 55 came in, Eisenhower closed up the shipyard, a lot of the shipyard. He unemployed a lot of the black residents in Bayview Hunters Point, which made a lot of our parents, not ours, but a lot of our friends' parents, become homeless, unemployed. They denied the meal to be in the homes at that particular time. That's why I try and stress to the young people what our foreparents have done in Bayview Hunters Point.
Let me stop you for one moment here.
Okay.
You said something that kind of kind of registered. You said they didn't allow the males to be in the homes. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is 1954, when they laid a lot of the African Americans males off in the shipyard. A lot of the meat companies, because all of the meat companies were in Bayview Hunters Point at that particular time. Del Monte, Swift, Oscar Mayer,
Allen Sons.
yeah, and they were all laid off. A lot of those companies moved, and for the mothers and the kids to be on welfare, the milk could not be in that home. And I had a lot of my friends, our friends, who had to go back to the South because they were unable. They didn't want, in other words, they didn't want to separate their families.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them went back to the South. A lot of our parents got on welfare if the meal was in the house or had anything, or shoe, or belt, anything to show that a meal present was there. They would take the mothers off of welfare.
So when the welfare worker came to the house to check, they checked to see whether they was clothes in
They
the
checked.
closet or
They
mail?
checked to see if there was any present of a male being there. They checked to see if you had a color TV, or excuse me, a black and white TV. They checked to see if you had an iron, anything that showed that you had any stability of being successful, a means of making money, because a lot of people were ironing people's clothes
Mm-hmm.
and that type of thing to bring money into the house. They took them off of welfare.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
They
See,
destroyed a lot of the families.
this is something that's need to be told. We have an historian here today that's telling the true story of the Bayview Hunters Point, how it was then, how it is now, and how it's changing back to how it used to be.
But one of the most favorable things for the black male at that particular time, if they had came out of the service, they were entitled to get monies to buy a home.
Mm-hmm.
So all the way up until the 70s, we were the largest home ownership in the whole city and county of San Francisco. We did a survey. I served as the Model Cities Commissioner during the 70s, and we commissioned a survey on ownership, home ownership in the Bayview Hunters Point community, and then throughout the city. And we found out 65% of home ownership, African American ownership, was in the Bayview Hunters Point community. We were the largest home ownership in the whole city and county of San Francisco.
Wow. Wow.
So, and then the next largest home ownership was the Western Addition, where African Americans had bought homes during the 50s and early 50s, when they denied the Koreans their homes when they took them out of the concentration camps.
Mm.
So just before they did that, a lot of the African Americans, we had cousins and uncles and what have you, bought homes in Western Addition. That's why we knew. Our parents went over to Western Addition to buy a house over there, which we cried because we didn't want to leave Hunters Point, and then they bought the house on Hall Street. But a lot of the blacks bought homes there before they let the Japanese out of those internment camps, where they had put them in internment camps during the 50s, 40s.
So now we're moving up. We're moving up from the 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s. We're getting in the 60s now. We're moving. We're in another age now, the 60s.
Okay.
Okay, give us a little history on the 60s into the 70s.
Well, the 60s, our community was being real prosperous. A lot of the young people at that particular time, well, I would go 64, 65, graduating out of high school and what have you, was hard to find jobs and what have you. Was a lot of police harassment at that particular time, because there wasn't that many African Americans on the police department, nor Mexican Americans on the San Francisco Police Department. So we went through a lot of harassment. And what I mean by harassment, if you were out at 12 o'clock, they would take you to juvenile hall. The police would stop you and harass you and what have you. But since the killing of Matthew Johnson 50 years ago, and I was an eyewitness on his assassination on Oakdale. I was on Navy Road. At that particular time, I was visited my girlfriend at that time, which since became my wife, been my wife for the last 49 years. But I seen them when they gunned down Matthews Johnson, when he came down Oakdale and stopped at the end of Oakdale, right now where the fence is at the Hunters Point Shipyard, jumped out the car and started running. There was 3 people who ran out of that car. But the police officers came shortly, kneeled down, they were running, and he shot. He didn't say hold or anything. I've seen a tape. If you see the Bayview Hunters Point stories from the 50s and 60s, you'll see the officer who shot Matthews Johnson in that clip, and the story he told. And I've just seen this clip in about the last 3-4 months, and it upset me because they never, like now, they'll try and find evidence and find witnesses to tell their stories of what happened and what have you. They never did do that in the 60s. In the 60s, I was a person with, just like young people's now, tired of the abuse that our foreparents go through, the denial that they have. They say young people don't have any vision on what happens, or they just don't care. They don't care because the way they've been treated, the way they've been denied, the way the police officers or what have you treat them. So they build up a hate or resistance, both between their parents and society, because society really denies them to be honorable citizens. And what I mean by honorable citizens, they don't teach you in school about yourselves, the tradition of the African American or the Native Americans, their history. So if you don't know your history, a lot of times you fall into the bag of you just don't care because what were you? Were you just a slave? Were you just a picker, a servant to another race? When we have a strong history, African American history, of what our foreparents have done, of what our foreparents have done. That was one of my problems going to school. My father would tell me different things about African history, which our father graduated from Southern University back in the 30s. And he had a lot of history and a lot of knowledge. But at the same time, he had a lot of knowledge and a lot of history. He was denied his trade and what he went to school for. He had 2 different trades. He was a horticulture. Okay, he had his degree in horticulture. He also had his degree in tailoring. Okay, and neither one of those he had the opportunity to do. He died a janitor working at San Francisco City Hall. I've never seen my father dislike or talk about anyone. We were raised to love everyone, in which we still do. I know I do. I'm not against whites. I'm not against blacks. I'm not against anyone. I'm for all peoples. He taught us the history about Jim Brown and peoples who helped African Americans during slavery. A lot of people don't even know. They talk about slavery. There were black people that had slaves, and that was another part of this knowledge that I want to give people on the website to go and find their history, how successful we are, and the things we went through. But I want to get back to the 70s.
I want to give the website number on the bottom of the screen. You have the website to the Bayview Hunters Point, 1956 to the 80s. On the bottom of the page there, you can go to the YouTube website, youtube.com. Watch, and it's on the bottom screen there. You write that down if you're interested in looking at that. Okay.
Okay. But since that time, going up to the 70s, since that time we became like, I served on model cities. I also served on the Joint House and under Miss Westbrook, Miss Essie Webb, Miss Julia Comer, Osceola Washington, Espinola Jackson. We both got on Joint House and together in the 68. But anyway, I got into community politics because, number one, I was facing 5 years of going to the penitentiary. And my biggest problem was shots So I had to get into something else because number one, I didn't want to go to the pen, and number two, I didn't want to get shots going into the pen. So I got into community politics, and when I got into community politics, I was the only young person at that particular time. I was 21 years old, getting into community politics, and it turned out to be favorable because I met icon persons like Honorable Joseph Alioto. I met the Honorable Phil Burton. I served on with Phil Burton and Honorable Joseph Alioto in 1973 on the closure of the Hunters Point shipyard. Ernie Mitchell and myself, we were the two from Bayview Hunters Point that served on the closure of the Hunters Point shipyard. On joint housing, we served with HUD in making sure what happened in Western Addition didn't happen in Hunters Point. That we've got preference on certificate of preference moving in, which was thought up and brought up and made by the joint housing to give certificates to everyone who lived in the Hunters Point, old Hunters Point projects. They got a certificate of preference and $4,500 from the age of 18 up to whoever, whatever age you were. If the kids were 18, 19, 20 years old, each one of those kids got a certificate of preference and also $4,500. At that particular time, myself, we were encouraging people to buy homes at that particular time. Me and my wife, we were able to put a couple of more dollars together, and we bought our home. At that time in 1969, we bought our house and we paid $30,000 for our home. Now my home is worth $80,000.
You paid $30,000 for your home?
I paid $30,000 for my home at that particular time. My house now is worth $800,000, which I couldn't afford today to buy.
Right.
Okay, I worked 40 years for the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency. I watchdogged the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency to make sure that they did what they said they were going to do in Bayview Hunters Point. And a lot of things they've done, but it takes community participation. It takes community to go to these meetings to make sure the OCII, which is the agency that has taken over the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency, it takes people going to those meetings and putting their input into that. We have 540 acres in the Hunters Point shipyard, which Lennar is a developer, and a lot of people talk about Lennar and this and all this, but someone have to develop the Hunters Point shipyard. Okay, now it's a large portion of that goes to the residents of Bayview Hunters Point. We have African marketplace. We have different businesses that can go in the Hunters Point shipyard, but we have to go to those meetings and say exactly what we want. We want to make sure residents in Bayview Hunters Point, as well as Western Addition, who were relocated by the OCII Redevelopment Agency, make sure they're able to start businesses in the Hunters Point shipyard. A lot of people talk about these young brothers and sisters who sell drugs and what have you. We want to get them into businesses. They're good business people. They have never been trained to be businessmen. Right. But if you know how to sell your weed or whatever drugs you sell and go and cop and get additional drugs, you're a pretty good business person. Right. So leave that illegal life and go to being a profitable life where you don't have to look over your shoulders and you'll be an asset to our community.
I agree. Yeah. So we covered the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, 70s. Let's move on to the 80s.
Okay. All right. So the 80s, we have an opportunity to do a lot of things. We have, first of all, in the 70s, from joint housing and model cities, we came up with a memorandum of understanding. And that memorandum of understanding gives 50% of all work that comes into Bayview Hunters Point to Bayview Hunters Point residents.
Is that now?
That's right now. Okay. That's grandfathered in. It was passed and ratified by the Board of Supervisors at that particular time. We had all of the unions signed it. I have the document. If anyone wants that document, I have copies of that document that guarantees us 50% of all, 100% citywide, 35% of all subcontracts or contracts goes to minorities. Okay, that's written. That's something that was passed. They sensed in the I would say 2014, 15, try to bring a memorandum of understanding where 25% is guaranteed for peoples of San Francisco. but ours supersedes that. Ours in 1970 supersedes everything. We were the first ones to have an off-campus college, Bayview Hunters Point College. 3 months before it was supposed, our college on Philp and Oakdale opened up, they defunded Bayview Hunters Point College. But Bayview Hunters Point College had city college courses. The first campus that have city college courses out of the city college on Ocean Street. We were the first ones. We had UC Berkeley courses there, and we had state courses all in one building at Bayview Hunters Point College.
Let me ask you a question. You spoke on the jobs. So many jobs are allocated to the community of San Francisco. Okay, in the Bayview Hunters Point. Right?
Bayview Hunters Point, 100%
Okay.
citywide.
Now, say for instance, they happen to move out of San Francisco. Those residents that was in the Bayview Hunters Point, like in Hunters Point, in the projects, they may say, "Well, I got me a voucher to move to Antioch."
Well, they will still have a preference, and especially the ones who have certificates or can show a report card, because we go on report cards. We go on things that young people of my age or 70 and on down who fought the fight in Hunters Point. And the reason we do that, they're the ones who live through the wrecking yards and the sewage treatment plants and the tally companies and all those other toxins that was in our community. Now it's being cleaned up, and we have all these new peoples coming in, which we welcome them. We welcome them to come in, but the ones who suffered are the ones who's going to get the benefits.
Okay, yeah.
You know.
That's something that need to be told, because a lot of people have moved out of San Francisco, like you said, Antioch, Stockton, different places, Palo Alto, and some of them don't have jobs.
They have preference. They have a preference. Like for an example, now we had a lot of people we try to get a lot of people into different trades and skills. But I'll use one trade for an example because my grandson was in it. The iron workers. They were begging people in the community to get in the iron workers union, do this and which pays real good. I have a friend who I went to school with, Franklin McCoy and Terry Anderson, who are well-known figures in the iron workers. They retired out of the iron workers, did 40 years, and they have a great influence on that. They come out and they try and talk to these young brothers and sisters to get in iron workers, which is hard work. And a lot of them have went to iron work. My grandson, he started iron work about 6 months, but he quit because it's hard work. But they have a lot of people who came from different states that's working in San Francisco because they don't have work for iron workers in the other states, in other parts of California. They're here now working as iron workers. But the guarantee is for our peoples to get these jobs. 50%, like I said, of Bayview Hunters Point, and 100% citywide. During Model Cities, we started 2 major programs, and one had started in the 60s by Joe Day of Manpower, which was funded by the unions to get people in the trade. But since that time, we have young community developers that we started with Model Cities, and we have a Mission Hiring Hall, which we started with Model Cities. Since that time, they have workforce development, but they're signed with the unions to train people, and once they get trained in these various unions, carpenter, electrical, what have you, they buy all their equipment. They put them in the unions. So these young people have no excuse
Well, they're not working.
not to go to work. But I insist that a lot of these brothers who's coming home from the pen, for whatever reason they went, they have that opportunity to come in, and I hope they come in and start getting some of these jobs so they can influence the young peoples, you know, and talk to these young peoples and let them know, leave that weed alone, leave that cocaine alone, leave all them drugs alone,
No future.
because their future, if they keep going that way, eventually they're going to get caught and they're going to be incarcerated. And that they're not going to be as lucky as a lot of the brothers like you, for an example, who came home. If you go now, you may not never come home.
You're not coming home. Okay, with that, we want to bring you back. Okay, because we short on time. We want to bring you back for a second week. Okay, so we're gonna stop this show today. Okay, we want to bring you back, and so you can pick up. Remember where you left off.
Okay.
Okay,
Even
because
in senior
because
moments.
because yeah, because we want to bring you back, and we want to pick up where you left off, and we thank you for coming on. We thank you for allowing the community, citizens in the community, to know about the history of the Baby Hunters Point. We appreciate you coming on, and we want you back on TV. So we're gonna make this a 2 week series instead of a 1 week. So we thank you for coming on tonight. We're gonna bring you back next week, and stay tuned to next week. We're gonna have Oscar James on, the historian out of Baby Hunters Point. We're gonna bring him back on next week. So watch the show next week, please.